Okay, so in this video, I'm going to just do a couple of questions. I'm not going to do lots. Just going to pick out a couple of Gould questions and tell you how you should answer them and do a couple of model answers. So watch this video, perhaps copy down the model answers or at least take some notes on how they should be answered and then have a go at a few questions yourself. So the first question that we're going to look at is this one. So describe the background to Gould's study of intelligence. So in order to get between 3 and 4 marks for this, you need a detailed and accurate description of the background to Gould's research. So the kind of things that you can include in this question. Remember, this question is the background to Gould's study of intelligence. So it's not describing Gould's aims. As soon as you start describing Gould's aims and what he wanted to find out, then you're not answering the question. So you can't include that. But what you need to include is the background, okay? So you can include things like the origins of intelligence testing. So where intelligence testing first began. You can include things about the concept that intelligence is inherited, like the genetic and heritability nature of it. The efforts to test intelligence objectively. So that's what Yerkes was aiming to do, was develop some tests which could do so objectively. Implications in terms of ethics, reliability, validity, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to have a go at typing out a model answer and then I'll just quickly go through it. So this is the answer so far. So I've not finished with it. It will probably pick up a couple of marks here. So the background to Gould's study of intelligence. Now initially I'm probably going to pick up a mark here for this bit. So by demonstrating that I've got an understanding of the original tests that were done on intelligence and the fact that they're individual tests. And then I'll probably pick up another mark here for acknowledging that America's involvement in World War One is part of this background and that this began with a drive to developing group tests. So I'm just going to finish off this answer and then I'll go through that second part. Okay, so I've just finished this answer off. So we've got up to here before. So what I'll say now is that I've finished this off by adding another couple of sentences. So I'll probably get another mark for my next sentence here. So Yerkes developed these tests. He also believed that intelligence was inherited and therefore could not be changed. And then I'll pick up another mark here for demonstrating some knowledge of the fact that the administration, development and analysis of these tests were problematic in terms of reliability, validity or ethics. Okay, so obviously I've given quite a detailed answer here. I'm not necessarily saying that this is the exact answer that they're looking for, but what I would do is make reference really to 4 things. I'd make reference to the original tests. I'd make reference to this use of Army alpha and beta tests for group testing. I'd make reference to inherited intelligence, and I would make reference to the problematic nature of these tests, and then that should get you 4 marks. Okay, so here is the next question that we'll have a look at. So this is just a 2 marker. So outline one problem with the design of the IQ test used by Yerkes. So your 2 marks come here from giving a clear problem, and the second mark from it being fully contextualized. So, for example, things that you could include in this, or problems you could give. So you could give the problem that the tests were any kind of instructions were written and given in English, and obviously immigrants were used. Another problematic thing could be that for those who are illiterate, there was involved use of like a pencil for writing or providing answers. For any images used, they were based upon kind of American culture. So it was stuff like white American middle class history and culture, and the multiple choice questions were also based upon things like that as well. So therefore that would have created a limitation for some people. So a nice, clear and contextualized answer. So this here is enough to get you 1 mark. So remember, your 2 marks come from a clear problem that is contextualized for the second mark. So here I've given a clear problem. I've said that one problem with the design of the IQ test by Yerkes is that they were culturally biased. So I've given a problem that would be enough to get me 1 mark. For the second mark, this is what we need to do. Okay, and I've just added a little bit of context to there now, quite a bit of context, which is what you need. So, upon my point of they're culturally biased, I've added the point that point of context that the Army Alpha and Beta tests, so I've used the names of the test, were a representation of middle class American culture. So I'm actually showing that I've got an understanding of what those tests included, and I've given an example. For example, I used a picture of a tennis court in one question. So we're not a representation of native intellectual ability. And then that's really all you need to do for those 2 marks. So you can use any of the points that we talked about before, but just make sure you're giving a clear problem and then you're doing it in context as well. Okay, so the next question is going to be this one. So Yerkes argued that intelligence is innate. Outline one reason why Yerkes' argument may be considered invalid. Okay, so there's a number of things that you can put here. So firstly, you could put that Yerkes may be biased by his own ideas. So obviously he had the idea going into this piece of research that intelligence is inherited and therefore it's genetically passed on, and therefore you could say he was led by his own ideas initially and therefore has shown some researcher bias. So that could be one thing that you could focus on. You could say that it is clear within his tests as an additional problem that intelligence is influenced by things like education, schooling, so nurture. Therefore, it's problematic for him to assume that intelligence is innate, so nature, if nurture does play a role. You could also talk about the fact that the actual testing of intelligence was flawed, and therefore any conclusions that are based upon this testing are also flawed. So, for example, the beta tests were for those who were illiterate but still required use of a pencil and stuff like that, and therefore anything that comes from those beta tests is not valid as a finding, and therefore we cannot draw valid conclusions from it. There's a number of things that you can put. That's just a few things that they're all mentioned in the mark schemes. So again, I'm just going to have a go at writing up a bit of a model answer and then I'll explain it to you. So I would structure this basically as a bit of a P paragraph, as it's essentially an evaluation question because you're evaluating the validity of the study. And it's for 3 marks, so kind of a P or a preel paragraph would do. So my point here is that one reason why this argument may be considered invalid is that the tests which conclusions were drawn from are flawed. So that's my reason. So then I'm just going to go on to give some context and explain that. So here is some evidence. So the evidence here is that I'm talking about the beta test. And I have given actual context from the study as to how that is flawed. So I've said it's designed for those who are illiterate. I've illustrated that the instructions were written and that in 3 of 7 parts the answers were to be given in writing. So next I just need to explain how that makes this argument invalid. And then finally, I've just concluded and explained. So here I have brought it back to the question in my explanation because I've said that therefore, as these recruits may have never held a pencil before, and those who were recent immigrants would have a limited understanding of English, they would be impaired in their ability to complete this. So we cannot conclude from this that their ability is purely influenced by innate intelligence. Okay, so I've given a reason why. It can be considered invalid that he's made this conclusion. Then I've given some evidence, and then I've just explained how that makes this argument less valid or invalid. Okay, so another question that we're going to practice here. Suggest one way in which the IQ tests developed by Yerkes may be considered reliable for 2 marks. So again, as this is suggest one way, but it's for 2 marks, it wants a clear way in which it's reliable, and then it wants it in context for the 2nd mark. So things that you can put here, obviously they were not done reliably, so they were not executed reliably, but the actual tests were intended to be reliable. So why they were intended to be reliable was that they were standardized. So each alpha test was exactly the same as the previous alpha test, and each beta test was exactly the same as all other beta tests. So the actual tests were standardized, the same questions were given to the people who were supposed to be literate, and then the same questions were given to those who were supposed to be illiterate. Okay, so that's one way. Another thing that you could include is that the tests were meant to be comparable. So the Army Alpha and Beta tests were meant to be reliably compared because they were essentially the same test, but they were just delivered in different formats. So you could really give either of those, just give them and then give them in context. So here I have got myself 1 mark so far because I've given a way in which they can be considered reliable, in that I've said that each of the tests were standardised. Now I just need to add context. And there we go, I've just added some context. So my context is saying beta test. I've shown an understanding of what standardization is because I've said that each person would have received the same questions. And then I've given further context by elaborating on the beta test so that it's clear that I have a full understanding of it, by demonstrating that I've got some knowledge of what goes into it, such as maze running, cube counting, and that it's got 7 parts. So this would be enough to get you 2 marks. And this is the last question that I'm going to practice with you. If you have already practiced this with me in a previous lesson, then you don't need to do this. You can just stop the video here and move on to the next task, which is to have a go at doing some questions of your own. But if you haven't done a model answer with me in class for this, then I would write this model answer out. So the question is, describe how Gould's study links with the key theme of measuring differences, and it's for 4 marks. So because it's about Gould's study, not Yerkes's, then you need to make it clear that you're talking about the review article, okay, not the initial testing of intelligence. You also, because it's about measuring differences, need to reference who we're demonstrating differences are between, what the difference is, how we measured them, and as always in these questions that are about key themes, there needs to be a finding. So, you know, you get a mark for basically each of those things there. So for who, what, how, and a finding. Okay, so in my opening sentence here, I have made it clear that I'm talking about a review article because I've used the word reviewed, and I've done my what part of the answer. So I've said what the difference is. So Gould's research reviewed how the difference of intelligence or mental age, which is the what part, was measured by Yerkes. Okay, so that's my what part done. So now I need to do the who, the how, and the finding. So next here I have done the how part. So I've actually talked about the tests used. So I've just built on top of the what here. So Yerkes' use of the Army Alpha or beta test or individual examination. So I've given the names of the tests that were used as the how part, okay? If you had just put IQ tests or intelligence tests or something as vague as that, you would lose a mark here. So in order to get the mark for the what for the how part, you need to be as specific as giving the names of the tests used. And I've just added the who part there. So I'm on a sample of 1.75 million army recruits. So in order to do the who part, you either need to give the sample size of 1.75 million participants, or you could say something like army recruits or military personnel or something like that, but you cannot get away with just saying men or people. That's not enough. So you need to be specific and say 1.7 million army recruits really to get that mark. And because this study is focusing on demonstrating differences between groups, so between like groups of ethnicities, as we found the average mental age for different ethnic groups, what I would say is you need to, in your finding, you must focus on demonstrating or measuring a difference between the groups and not between individuals. Also, with your findings, because you are talking about measuring differences between those groups, I expect to see two results or two findings so that you can show that you are measuring those differences and therefore trying to make a comparison between groups. The finding that I've given is here. So the results of these tests indicated that the black man had a lower average mental age of 10.4 than white American adult males at 13. So I've given a finding there, and then all I just need to do to finish this off is link it back to that question. And then I've just finished it off here. So therefore, this reviewed measures of measures in differences in intelligence related to ethnicity. So again, just to clarify where those marks are coming from, I'm getting 1 mark here. I am getting 1 mark here. I'm getting my 3rd mark here. And I'm getting my 4th mark here. Okay, so as soon as you have written this one down, you can stop the video and then go on to the rest of the work.